The date is January 1942. The place is the North Atlantic Ocean, and the devil himself is hunting beneath the waves. A German U-boat glides through black water 300 feet below the surface, silent as a ghost, deadly as plague. Its commander peers through the periscope at convoy HX-229, 40 merchant ships crawling across the Atlantic like sheep unaware of the wolf. Oil tankers, cargo vessels, troop transports, each one carrying food, weapons, fuel, the lifeline keeping Britain alive. The commander doesn't hesitate. He speaks a single word: loss. Fire. 6 torpedoes slice through the darkness. The first strikes a tanker amidships, splitting her hull like an axe through kindling. The explosion is a brief sun rising from the sea, blinding, beautiful, horrifying. Men are thrown into freezing water. Some are already dead. Some are on fire. Some scream for help that will never come. The second torpedo finds a cargo ship. The third, a destroyer that was supposed to protect the convoy. Within 12 minutes, 3 ships are gone, swallowed by an ocean that keeps all secrets. And the U-boat slips away, undetected, untouchable, a predator returning to darkness. This is happening every single day, every single night. Across thousands of miles of ocean, German submarines are winning a war that will decide everything. If the Atlantic falls, Britain starves. If Britain starves, the Nazis win. And the reason they're winning is devastatingly simple. The Germans can talk in perfect secrecy. Every order, every coordinate, every tactical plan is encrypted by a machine called Enigma, a device so mathematically sophisticated that breaking it seems impossible. The British intercept thousands of messages daily, but they might as well be reading gibberish. Random letters that mean nothing. Chaos that reveals nothing. Men are dying because of mathematics. Drowning because of cryptography. Burning alive because nobody can break the code. Until one man says it can be done. His name is Alan Matheson Turing. He is 29 years old, socially awkward, completely brilliant, and utterly unlike anyone the British military has ever encountered. And he's about to change the world. Not with bullets, not with bombs, but with something far more powerful, pure, uncompromising thought. To understand what Alan Turing walked into, you must first understand what was at stake. By 1942, World War II had consumed the entire planet. Europe was drowning in Nazi occupation. Russia was bleeding on the Eastern Front. America had just entered the war after Pearl Harbor. And Britain stood alone in the West, an island fortress under siege. The siege wasn't obvious. There were no trenches on British soil, no tanks rolling through London streets. But every day, the noose tightened, because Britain is an island. Everything. Food, fuel, weapons, hope itself had to cross the Atlantic. And German U-boats were systematically destroying that lifeline. In 1942 alone, they sank over 1,600 Allied ships. 7.8 million tons of shipping sent to the bottom. Each ship represented hundreds of lives. Sailors who would never see home, pilots whose planes would never fly for lack of fuel, soldiers who would never receive ammunition for their guns. Winston Churchill would later write the most chilling sentence of his wartime memoirs: "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. Not the Blitz. Not the threat of invasion. Not defeat in North Africa. The submarines. Because if they won the Atlantic, everything else became irrelevant. And they were winning because of Enigma. The machine was brilliant. German engineers had created something that seemed mathematically unbreakable. It looked like a typewriter in a wooden box, innocent and bureaucratic. But inside was a system of rotors, wheels with electrical contacts, that scrambled each letter through multiple transformations. Press the letter A, and it might become Q. Press A again immediately after, and it becomes M. Press it a third time, and it becomes F. No pattern, no repetition, The rotors moved with each keystroke, creating an ever-changing cipher that reset itself with every letter. The German military version used 3 rotors, selected from a set of 5. That alone gave 60 possible rotor arrangements. Each rotor had 26 starting positions. That's 17,576 rotor configurations. And there was more, a plug board at the front that could swap 10 pairs of letters before and after encryption. Calculate every possible setting, every possible configuration, and you get a number that defies comprehension. 159 trillion possible combinations. 159 quintillion. To put that in perspective, if every human being on Earth worked 24 hours a day, testing one setting per second, it would take 15 billion years to test them all. The sun would collapse into a white dwarf before you finished. The universe itself would grow cold and dark. The Germans changed their Enigma settings every single day at midnight. New rotor order. New rotor positions. New plug board settings. Everything reset. Which meant that even if you somehow broke yesterday's settings, which was already impossible, it meant nothing today. You had to break it again. From scratch, every 24 hours. The mathematics were brutally simple. Break the code early in the day, and you could route convoys to safety, position destroyers to hunt U-boats, save ships and lives. Break it late, or not at all, and men died. It was that stark, that unforgiving. People ask, how do you solve the impossible? How do you break mathematics itself? The answer is simple, and yet profound. You don't fight the problem on its own terms. You change the battlefield entirely. Alan Matheson Turing was born June 23, 1912, in London, into a world that would soon tear itself apart in the First World War. His father was a civil servant in the Indian Civil Service, absent for most of Alan's childhood, a distant figure who existed more in photographs than in memory. His mother, Ethel, was educated and independent-minded, but she, too, was often away. Young Alan was raised largely by foster families and boarding schools, institutions designed to mold boys into proper English gentlemen. They failed spectacularly. Alan was strange. There was no other word for it. While other children played games with rules they understood instinctively, Alan was discovering that pine cones grew in spirals following mathematical sequences, that daisy petals in a field obeyed Fibonacci numbers, that the entire natural world was written in a language of patterns and logic that nobody else seemed to see. He had no interest in subjects that bored him. His handwriting was atrocious. His Greek and Latin were disasters. But in mathematics and science, his mind operated on a level that frightened his teachers. They didn't know what to do with him. At Sherborne School, one of England's elite boarding institutions, his housemaster wrote a report that captured the establishment's bewilderment perfectly. He is the kind of boy who is bound to be a problem in any school or community. The subtext was clear. Alan Turing didn't fit. He couldn't be molded. He refused to pretend to be something he wasn't. But there was one person who understood him. Christopher Morcom was a year older, brilliant in mathematics, and the first real friend Alan ever had. They talked about science and philosophy and ideas that most teenagers never considered. For the first time in his life, Alan wasn't alone, and then Christopher died. Tuberculosis, sudden and merciless. He was 18 years old. Alan was devastated, but grief transformed into something else, a driving need to understand consciousness, intelligence, thought itself. If the brain was just a biological machine, could thought be mechanized? Could intelligence be replicated? Could machines think? It was a question that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He went to Cambridge University, to King's College, where his peculiar genius finally found a home. He studied mathematics under some of Britain's finest minds. And he became obsessed with a question that seemed purely theoretical. What can be computed? What problems can be solved by following logical steps? What are the limits of calculation itself? In 1936, at just 24 years old, Alan Turing published a paper that would change everything. The title was dense and academic, On Computable Numbers, with an application to the Entscheidungsproblem. But the content was revolutionary. He described a theoretical machine, something that existed only in imagination, only in mathematical abstraction. It had an infinitely long tape divided into squares, a read-write head that could move left or right along the tape, a set of rules telling it what to do based on what it read. This machine could perform any calculation that could be precisely defined. Any algorithm, any logical process, it was universal. And it existed only on paper. Decades later, when engineers built the first electronic computers, they would realize with shock that they were building Turing's machine. Every computer since, every smartphone, every digital device, operates on principles Alan Turing first imagined in pure mathematics. But in 1939, as Hitler's Germany invaded Poland and Britain declared war, this all seemed like abstract academic theory, utterly irrelevant to the real world of armies and navies and the coming storm. How catastrophically wrong that assumption would prove to be. September 4th, 1939. The day after Britain declares war on Nazi Germany. A young man arrives at Bletchley Park, a Victorian manor house in Buckinghamshire, roughly 50 miles northwest of London. His name is Alan Turing. He's 27 years old. He wears shabby clothes that don't quite fit. His hair is unkempt. He rides a bicycle with a faulty chain that he refuses to fix properly, instead counting pedal rotations and dismounting at precise mathematical intervals when he knows it will fail. The military officers at Bletchley Park don't know what to make of him. He speaks in a high-pitched voice that becomes more pronounced when excited. He can't make small talk. He doesn't understand social hierarchies or military protocol. But someone remembered that strange paper he'd written, the one about theoretical machines and computation. And they had a problem that seemed unsolvable. Enigma, Britain's government code and cipher school, had been trying to break German military communications for months. They'd recruited chess champions, linguists, mathematicians, brilliant minds working in rotating shifts around the clock. Rooms full of people chain-smoking, drinking endless tea, staring at columns of encrypted letters until their eyes bled. And they were failing, because human beings, no matter how intelligent, could never move fast enough. You had maybe 12 hours after midnight to break that day's settings before the most valuable intelligence became useless. Every hour of delay meant more ships sunk, more planes shot down, more men dead. When Alan Turing examined Enigma for the first time, he saw something nobody else could see. He saw past the mechanical complexity, past the overwhelming mathematics of 159 quintillion possibilities. He saw a weakness, a flaw built into the very heart of the machine's design. Enigma had a peculiar property: it would never encrypt a letter as itself. If you pressed A, it could become any letter except A. This seemed like a strength. It prevented obvious patterns. But to Turing's mathematical mind, it was the crack in the foundation, because it meant constraints. And constraints meant possibilities could be eliminated. But even with that knowledge, the problem remained impossible for humans. You needed speed. You needed a machine to fight a machine. So Alan Turing began designing something the world had never seen. He called it the bomb, named after an earlier Polish cipher device. But Turing's bomb was far more sophisticated, built on principles nobody else fully understood. Because nobody else had spent years thinking about what machines could theoretically compute. The first bomb was installed at Bletchley Park in March 1940. It was a monster. 7 feet tall, weighing over a ton, 36 rotating drums arranged in banks of 3, each drum representing an Enigma rotor. Miles of wire connecting everything in configurations that looked like industrial art. When activated, it clattered like a factory floor. The drums spun with mechanical fury, testing thousands of Enigma configurations simultaneously. The noise was overwhelming, a symphony of clicking, whirring, clattering that never stopped. The principle was mathematically elegant. German operators made mistakes. They were human. They used predictable phrases at predictable times. Wettervorhersage, weather forecast, appeared in meteorological reports every morning. Keine besonderen Ereignisse, nothing to report, was common in quiet sectors. These cribs, known pieces of plaintext, created logical contradictions in most possible Enigma settings. The Bombay exploited these contradictions at mechanical speed, eliminating impossibilities until only the correct setting remained. And it worked. What would take a team of analysts 3 weeks could now be done in 3 hours. What was mathematically impossible became merely difficult. By the end of 1940, Bletchley Park had several bombs running continuously. By 1942, there were dozens. Eventually, over 200 bombs operated around the clock, each one a weapon more powerful than any battleship. They were operated mostly by women, members of the Women's Royal Naval Service, called Wrens. They worked in shifts, feeding paper tapes into the machines, monitoring the drums, noting when a bomb stopped, indicating a possible solution. They would never know what their machines actually did. Security was absolute. But their work was saving thousands of lives every single day, because Alan Turing had done something that seemed impossible. He had built thought. He had mechanized logic. He had created a machine that could solve problems requiring intelligence. He had proven that computation itself was a weapon, and weapons change wars. But breaking the code created a problem almost as difficult as breaking the code itself. A problem that haunted everyone at Bletchley Park, that kept commanders awake at night, that forced impossible decisions every single day. What do you do with the intelligence? Imagine this. You've just decrypted a German message revealing that U-boats are moving to intercept convoy SC-42 in the North Atlantic. You know their exact positions. You know when they'll attack. You could route the convoy to safety. You could save every ship, every man. But if you do that, if your defensive measures are too perfect, too precise, the Germans will notice. They'll realize their unbreakable code has been broken. They'll change everything. New machines. New procedures. And just like that, you're blind again. Reading nothing. Saving no one. This wasn't theoretical. This was the daily arithmetic at Bletchley Park. Every decrypt carried the highest possible security classification, ultra-secret, a level above top secret, so secret that only a handful of commanders knew it existed. Elaborate deceptions had to be created whenever ultra-intelligence was used. If Ultra revealed a German convoy's location, the RAF would first send a reconnaissance aircraft to accidentally spot it. Only then would bombers attack. If the Germans analyzed the attack afterward, they'd conclude bad luck, not broken codes. The deception had to be perfect, which meant accepting terrible costs. Sometimes targets that could have been destroyed were left alone because attacking would compromise the source. Sometimes you watched men die when you could have saved them, because Ultra's long-term value was worth more than individual lives. The mathematics were brutal. How many lives could you sacrifice today to save thousands tomorrow? On November 14, 1940, Enigma decrypts revealed the Luftwaffe was planning a massive bombing raid on Coventry, an industrial city in the English Midlands. Historians still debate what happened next. What's certain is that Coventry wasn't evacuated. Fighter defenses weren't massively reinforced. That night, 449 German bombers dropped 503 tons of high explosives and 30,000 incendiaries. The medieval cathedral was destroyed. The city center was obliterated. 568 people died. Whether the decision was made to protect Ultra or whether there simply wasn't time to mount adequate defense without revealing the source, the result was the same. People died to keep the secret safe. This was the terrible arithmetic of total war. Every day brought impossible decisions. But the mathematics worked in Britain's favor, because Enigma intelligence was saving far more lives than were sacrificed to protect it. Nowhere was this more evident than in the Battle of the Atlantic, the longest, deadliest campaign of the entire war. German U-boats operated in wolf packs, groups of submarines coordinated by radio, hunting convoys like wolves hunting elk. The tactic was devastatingly effective. Find a convoy, shadow it, call in other U-boats, attack at night when destroyers couldn't see you. In 1942, at the height of the U-boat offensive, Germans were sinking ships faster than Allies could build them. Over 1,600 Allied ships were destroyed that year. Entire convoys were massacred. Crews drowned in water so cold that death came in minutes, or burned alive in oil fires that spread across the ocean's surface. Winston Churchill would write in his memoirs, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril. Not Hitler. Not the Blitz. Not the threat of invasion. The submarines." But Enigma intelligence was changing everything in ways the Germans couldn't understand. When Bletchley Park broke German naval Enigma, the most difficult version, Allied commanders could see the entire battlefield. They knew where U-boat patrol lines were positioned. They could route convoys around them. They could position escorts where they were most needed. The statistics are stark. When Enigma was being read regularly, Allied shipping losses dropped by 50% or more. When the Germans introduced new security measures and Bletchley Park went temporarily blind, losses spiked immediately. In February 1942, the Germans added a fourth rotor to naval Enigma machines. For 10 months, Bletchley Park couldn't read U-boat messages. During those 10 months, Allied losses were catastrophic. Nearly 900 ships sunk, the highest of the entire war. When naval Enigma was finally broken again in December 1942, through a combination of captured materials and mathematical breakthroughs, the tide turned almost immediately. Shipping losses plummeted. U-boats started dying faster than Germany could build them. Enigma intelligence didn't just save ships. It saved the war. Historians estimate that ultra-intelligence reduced Allied shipping losses by somewhere between 1.5 and 2 million tons. Hundreds of ships. Thousands of lives. The difference between Britain surviving and Britain starving. Alan Turing's machine had become the most powerful weapon in the Atlantic, and almost nobody knew it existed. By 1944, Bletchley Park had become a city of secrets. Over 10,000 people worked there, though most had no idea what others were doing. Compartmentalization was absolute. The bombs ran continuously, over 210 of them by war's end, operated by thousands of Wrens, working in shifts that never stopped. Intelligence flowed to commanders in every theater. Wehrmacht communications in North Africa, Luftwaffe dispositions over Germany, Kriegsmarine movements in the Mediterranean, and now all that capability, all that expertise, focused on a single objective. Operation Overlord. The invasion of France. D-Day. The invasion was scheduled for early June 1944, weather permitting. Over 156,000 Allied troops would storm 5 Normandy beaches in the opening assault, supported by 7,000 ships and 11,500 aircraft. If it succeeded, Nazi Germany would fight a two-front war, Soviets from the east, Western Allies from France. Defeat became inevitable. If it failed, if the Allies were thrown back into the sea with catastrophic losses, the war might drag on for years. Political will might collapse. Hundreds of thousands more would die. Everything hung on surprise. The Germans knew an invasion was coming that was inevitable. What they didn't know was where or when. Hitler and his generals believed the most likely target was Pas de Calais, the shortest crossing from England, only 21 miles, with better ports than Normandy. The Allies did everything to reinforce that belief. They created a fictional army group in southeast England, complete with inflatable tanks, dummy landing craft, false radio traffic, and double agents feeding carefully crafted lies to German intelligence. But they needed to know if the deception was working. They needed to know where German divisions were positioned, whether reinforcements were moving toward Normandy, whether panzer divisions near Calais would be released to counterattack. They needed Enigma. In the months before D-Day, Bletchley Park worked at fever pitch. Every decrypt was analyzed for troop movements, defensive preparations, German assessments of Allied intentions. The intelligence picture was almost complete, more detailed than any invasion force had ever possessed. When D-Day came on June 6, 1944, Enigma intelligence had given Allied commanders an unprecedented advantage. They knew the German defensive structure. They knew unit locations. They knew that the deception had worked. Hitler was still convinced the real invasion would come at Calais. German panzer divisions that could have counterattacked on D-Day stayed near Calais, waiting for an invasion that would never come. By the time Hitler realized his mistake, the Allies had established an unbreakable beachhead. The invasion succeeded. France was liberated. 11 months later, on May 8, 1945, Nazi Germany surrendered unconditionally. The war was over. And a secret remained buried. Historians estimate that Enigma intelligence shortened the war by at least 2 years, possibly as many as 4. Think about what that means. 2 years fewer of the Holocaust. 2 years fewer of the Eastern Front slaughter, where millions died in battles that consumed entire armies. 2 years fewer of strategic bombing, of occupied nations, of starvation and suffering. Millions of lives saved. Because one man had imagined a machine that didn't exist, then built it when the world needed it most. Alan Turing had won the war without firing a single shot. He had defeated Nazi Germany with mathematics and logic and pure thought. And almost nobody would ever know. When the war ended, Bletchley Park became one of the most closely guarded secrets in British history. The bombs were destroyed. Documents were burned. Every person who worked there, over 10,000 people, was bound by the Official Secrets Act, forbidden from ever speaking about what they'd done. Alan Turing returned to academic life, continuing his work on computing and artificial intelligence. In 1950, he published a paper proposing what became known as the Turing test, a method for determining whether a machine could truly think. He continued developing the theoretical foundations of computer science, writing about morphogenesis and the mathematical basis of biological form. But in 1952, Alan Turing's life was destroyed by the very country he had saved. He was prosecuted for homosexuality, which was illegal in Britain at the time. The trial was brief. The verdict was guilty. He was given a choice: prison or chemical castration, hormone treatments designed to eliminate his sexuality. He chose the treatments. They devastated him, physically, mentally, emotionally. The man who had helped defeat Nazi tyranny was now being persecuted by the democracy he'd saved. The brilliant mind that had changed the course of human history was being chemically altered because of who he loved. On June 7, 1954, Alan Turing was found dead at his home in Wilmslow, Cheshire. He was 41 years old. An apple, partially eaten, sat beside his bed. The official verdict was suicide by cyanide poisoning, though some have questioned whether it was truly suicide or a tragic accident. The man who had saved millions of lives died alone, and disgraced. For decades, his contributions remained classified. His family wasn't allowed to know what he'd done during the war. His friends couldn't speak about his achievements. The full story of Bletchley Park and Enigma wasn't revealed until the 1970s, over 25 years after the war ended. It would take until 2013, 59 years after his death, for the British government to officially pardon Alan Turing. Queen Elizabeth II granted him a posthumous pardon, an acknowledgement that the prosecution had been unjust, that the treatment had been wrong, that one of Britain's greatest heroes had been destroyed by prejudice and ignorance. But here's what they couldn't take from him. Here's what survives beyond the injustice, beyond the tragedy, beyond the waste of a brilliant life cut short. Every time you use a computer, you are using Alan Turing's ideas. Every time you unlock your phone with a password, you're relying on cryptographic principles he helped establish. Every time you interact with artificial intelligence, you're engaging with concepts he pioneered. The theoretical machine he imagined in 1936, the Turing machine, became the foundation of all modern computing. His work on computation and algorithms established computer science as a discipline. His thoughts on machine intelligence opened entire fields of research that continue today. And in those quiet rooms at Bletchley Park, working 18-hour days in cramped, smoke-filled spaces, surrounded by the clattering of bombs and the desperate urgency of war, Alan Turing proved something profound. He proved that thought itself is a weapon. That intelligence, when properly applied, can be more powerful than any army. That mathematics and logic and pure abstract reasoning can change the world as profoundly as any physical force. The Atlantic Ocean, 1945. The U-boats have been defeated. Convoys cross safely. Britain survives. The invasion succeeds. The war ends. And in the invisible battlefield at Bletchley Park, where the real war was fought, Alan Turing stands as the unlikely hero. Not because he destroyed, not because he conquered, but because he thought. He saw a problem that seemed impossible and refused to accept that impossibility. He looked at mathematics that said you cannot, and responded, watch me. He took abstract theory and transformed it into concrete reality when humanity needed it most. Desmond Doss saved 75 men on Hacksaw Ridge and became a legend. Alan Turing saved millions across the Atlantic and the world forgot him. Both men faced impossible odds. Both men refused to compromise their principles. Both men proved that courage takes many forms. One man showed that you don't need a weapon to be a hero. The other showed that the most powerful weapon isn't forged from steel, it's forged from thought. Alan Turing walked into an invisible war armed only with his mind. And he won, not with violence, not with aggression, but with something far more revolutionary, the power of human intelligence, mechanized and unleashed against tyranny. His machines didn't kill, they saved. His mathematics didn't destroy, they protected. His legacy isn't measured in enemies defeated, but in lives preserved, in catastrophes prevented, in a world that survived because one strange, brilliant, lonely man saw what nobody else could see. The world will always remember soldiers who charged into battle with rifles blazing, but it should never forget the man who charged into an impossible problem with nothing but a pencil and paper. The man who proved that sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply thinking differently. That genius, when applied with courage, can move the world. That one mind, refusing to accept the impossible, can change the course of history. One calculation, one breakthrough, one brilliant insight at a time. Alan Matheson Turing, the man who wouldn't accept defeat, the genius who mechanized thought, the hero who taught us that the greatest victories aren't always won on battlefields. Sometimes they're won in quiet rooms where brilliant minds refuse to surrender to the impossible. And his legacy endures. In every computer, in every algorithm, in every digital device that shapes our modern world. The war he fought was invisible, but the victory was real, and it changed everything.